Welcome to another video from Demystifying Proposals. A few weeks ago, we did a video on RFP to outline, taking a live RFP and demonstrating how to create an outline based on that RFP. In this video, we're going to focus just on the technical approach, which was subfactor 1 for that RFP, and dive in a little bit deeper into that demonstration. So this is the proposal format instructions from section L, or as they call them, the proposal preparation instructions. They are asking for 1-inch margins on all sides, which is pretty standard in federal government proposals, Times New Roman 12 point for text, 10 point for graphics and tables. The RFP doesn't mention actually a font for tables, only for graphics and diagrams. So this is potentially a question we might want to ask to confirm that that applies to tables as well as graphics and diagrams. A lot of times the government thinks of graphics and tables as the same thing. We also might want to ask a question about whether the headers and footers can be in a smaller font to fit in the 1-inch margins, because there's a lot of information, as we'll see later, that needs to go into the headers and footers, and fitting that in a 1-inch margin can be tough. There's also a requirement for a single space between lines. This might be a question we also want to ask to confirm that this instruction just means single space in the paragraph headings. I would ask this question mostly because we believe others may also ask this question, and the way they ask it, we may get an answer we don't want. Portrait orientation is required. Again, that's fairly standard for a federal government proposal. Company name, RFP number, contract, page number of numbers of pages is required in the footer. So as I said, that's a lot of information to fit into a 1-inch margin footer at 12 point Times New Roman. So these were the section L technical volume content instructions. This is for the technical volume overall. As you can see, the first of those technical volume requirements was the technical approach, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. We are doing another video on the staffing plan section, so there will be another video on subfactor 2, but just wanted to point out that the technical volume includes 5 sections, the first of which is the technical approach. In the same way, section M, technical volume instructions, have the same 5 subsections: technical approach, staffing plan, management plan, similar experience, and 508 compliance. As you can see, technical approach is subfactor 1, as we were discussing earlier. So that's the section that we're going to be talking about. And the section L instructions and the section M instructions call it the same thing, so that's convenient. So now that we've looked at section L and the way that they list out the requirements, and section M and the way they list out the subfactors, we can create those level 1 headings for our outline. We would include management plan because even though it doesn't have any further description in section L, and it's not in the adjectival evaluation criteria in section L, it's still a subfactor in section M, and it does actually appear in section L. So one way or another, management plan needs to be there until we get an answer to our question about that. So technical approach is section 1 of the outline with the L&M references in the heading. I have put in section L1 as the technical approach, even though section L is actually not numbered. It's just very hard. You need some kind of a reference for that and for all the subheadings under it. So I just use the subfactor number. Same thing with staffing plan. So staffing plan is section L2 and also subfactor 2 from section M. The other sections would then also serve as our level 1 heading for the outline. So in this screenshot, you can see the 5 level 1 headings: technical approach, staffing plan, management plan, similar experience, 508 compliance. So we have all of our level 1 headings now complete in our outline, and now we just have to fill in the rest. Note that there's a dummy heading 2 and heading 3 in our outline, so that's what's there. We'll fill those in now. So there are more detailed instructions in both L and M about what the technical volume sections should include. So now we're going to add those proposal instructions from section L in the table that precedes each proposal section for that content. And then we're going to add the section M instructions as well. And then we use those details to construct the outline for the rest of each subsection. So this is a screenshot of what the technical approach subfactor 1, what the instructions would look like. So there was a fairly detailed list of what goes into the technical approach from section L, including subsections A, B, and C. The description of what goes in technical approach from section M is then in the next box as what are evaluation criteria. We put these in the outline to help the authors have guidance about what that section is going to be. So technical approach overall has to address all of these things from section L and all of these things from section M. Note that subsection B here calls it the statement of work, and we've had other places where they called it performance work statement. So again, that's just, a little bit of confusion there. But that's also where the outline that is the section, the statement of work requirements would go within section B, and we'll show you how to do that. And then there's actually quite a few sets of instructions before the ABC here. So it's really important that as you're writing to the sections under A, B, and C, or maybe you have an introductory section that talks to those specific instructions. I think the way I structured this, we can fit a lot of that within A and B. You'll see that on incoming slides, but it's very important that you not ignore that whole paragraph that starts, or the two paragraphs that come before the A, B, and C, because those are actually requirements, even if they're not in the A, B, and C list. So as I said, it's tempting to just pay attention to the A, B, and C and not pay attention to the instructions above the A, B, and C to make sure. But we want to make sure that we're not going to get in any trouble from a compliance perspective and also from a compelling perspective. So as I said, in this case, I think that we can take those instructions and cover them in the subsections A and B. So the language, the contractor shall provide an analysis of the task requirements to indicate their instruction of the task requirements, operating environment, and task order objectives. That sort of aligns to section A, which is talking about the problem, scope, and purpose of the project. So I think you could cover that analysis under problem, scope, and purpose. Then a contractor shall provide a description of the performance techniques and methodology they propose in the performance of this task. Aligns to proposed technical approach to comply with each of the requirements. So I think that is covered in section B, subsection B here. So that's where I would try and make sure that I'm talking a little bit to the performance techniques and the methodology that you propose in the performance of this task. Note that this is also very performance work statement language, not statement of work kind of language. And there is a section in the statement of work that's specifically a performance matrix. So clearly performance techniques is very important in this particular RFP. So you definitely need to address that somewhere in your proposal. And then the last part of that introductory section is the contractor shall provide a project plan describing the process and approach they propose to use to successfully complete each task outlined in the contract work breakdown structure. The project plan shall correlate to the contractor's price cost proposal. So again, I think that aligns to subsection B, which is asking you to address the requirements of the task order statement of work. However, it might be worth asking a question here about a project plan, because a project plan can be a very specific thing that they may be asking you to include, but you only have 20 pages to address all 5 requirements. And a project plan itself could be 20 pages. So you might ask them if they actually want a detailed project plan and could that be in an appendix, or you might ask them how much, try and address what they mean by a project plan in some other way in a question, because it's a little confusing about how you would put a project plan in a section that's very page limited. So now that we figured out where we're going to put the paragraphs that come before the A, B, and C, we want to put the A, B, and C into our outline. note that I shortened the titles so that rather than using the whole language of the A, B, and C, I shortened them into something that's obvious, that to me is obvious, that the one-to-one mapping would be obvious to the evaluators. Also, we add the .A, .B, .C references to the L requirement, so that helps us um, show which sections are aligned to which subfactors or which technical approach factors. And then the next thing we would do is add the tasks from the statement of work, which can be found in sections C3 and C4 of the RFP. There are 6 tasks, each of which will need to be addressed, even the optional tasks. And depending on our page challenges, we should also include the deliverables and the performance matrix somewhere in this section. And but we did add the references to section C in the bracketed RFP references. Personally, it's a personal preference for me that I keep the L and the M references when I add the section C references in the bracketed RFP references, since the content to address the statement of work is required under the section L requirements. In that way, the bracketed RFP references serve as a compliance matrix for the evaluator so that they can see that, yes, we're addressing the statement of work, but it's within the section L and M requirements. If you need to save space in the end, which you may need to because this is an extremely page limited proposal, you might delete the L&N references for the statement of work tasks. Personal preference is to leave them, but you may not have the space to do that. Also, section C9 has some elements that we may need to include somewhere. We're not going to address all of them in detail, but we should make note of them. It's the vendor requirements we'll see on a future slide. So you want to make sure that you're at least addressing those so that when the evaluators are looking at section C9, they can check all those boxes. Keep in mind that our technical approach should also reflect the contract type, which is found in section B of the RFP. In this case, most of the tasks are firm fixed price, with only task 5 being cost reimbursable. We talk about that in some of our other trainings, that it's very important to keep the contract type in mind when you're writing your technical approach. So since most of these tasks are firm fixed price, they're likely driven by the deliverables and the performance matrix. So again, we need to make sure that that's how we're doing our technical approach based on how we're going to make those deliverables happen. So section C3 lists the tasks of the statement of work. There are 6 tasks, 2 of which are optional. Just because they're optional doesn't mean that you don't have to write to them. In fact, you do definitely have to write to them. And then section C4 provides all the details for these 6 tasks. We're not going to talk about that because the outline would just include the 6 tasks. The proposal instructions that would go in front of each task would include all those details, but we're just talking about the outline in this particular video. So we didn't provide all those details in section C4, which goes on for several pages. And then this is section C9, the minimum vendor requirements or the minimum vendor qualifications. This is what I was talking about earlier. There are 16 of them. So you're not going to have room to individually deal with each one of these. And so I wouldn't necessarily dive into the specifics, but I would make sure as part of your review cycle that the reviewers look at these 16 qualifications and make sure that they can check the box that all of those things are addressed somewhere. If you end up with space, which I don't think you're going to, but if you did, you could put the C9 references in the sections where those particular items are evaluated, just to do that cross matrix. That might not be a bad idea. So this is the section B CLIN structure. As you can see, 6 of the tasks, there are 6 tasks mirroring what's in sections L and M. 5 of the tasks are firm fixed price, so everything except for task 5 is a firm fixed price task. This affects, as I said, how we write our technical approach, because a firm fixed price contract is usually driven by deliverables. You're paid based on the deliverables. So it's very important that you have to explain how you're going to get to those deliverables as part of your technical approach. In this case, because the RFP also has some confusion about whether it's actually a statement of work, they call it a statement of work in some places, and they call it a performance work statement in other places. There's also a performance matrix as well as the deliverables. And again, that's something that you probably need to address within your approach as well. So blending our section L and M references, our breakdown of the A, B, and C within section L. So, so those are the level 2 headings. Then we put the level 3 headings as the tasks under the section B of the proposed technical approach. That's how they asked us to lay it out, and that's how we're going to do it so that we are compliant. So the last step in doing outlining is adding the page limits to the headers. In this case, the RFP is limiting the technical volume to 20 pages. So we're only talking about the technical approach in this video. So the whole technical volume, all 5 requirements, is limited to 20 pages. And again, we have several questions we would ask about additional pages here and there and how the management plan is going to be incorporated. And there's some things that they ask for that might be appendices, but overall, you only have 20 pages. So the last part of the outlining should be assigning the number of pages for each main section and each subsection. This is the guidance that you provide to the authors about how many pages they should be writing in their drafts. You should explain that the subsection page limits are inclusive of the overall section page limit. So if you give the section, as you'll see in a second, we give the section for technical approach 10 pages, then you break down those 10 pages for each of the subsections, but that doesn't mean each subsection is like 3 pages in addition to the 10 pages. The 3 pages are inclusive of the overall 10 pages. And then given the section M says the subfactors are in descending order of importance, subfactors 1 and 2 are the most important. So we allocated the most pages in our outline to those 2 subfactors. Subfactor 1 is the one we're talking about in this particular video. So that's why we dedicated a lot of our content pages to that subfactor. So here, as we outline the technical approach, we have the L and M references. We have 10 pages for the overall technical approach. We have the breakdown of the A, B, and C in the level 2 headings. So we have the level 3 headings, which is the breakdown of the statement of work. And then we've allocated pages for each of those sections. So we have 1 page for section A, we have 8 pages for section B, that's the statement of work, and that's the most important, or the thing that's going to take up the most pages. And then we have 1 page for section C. And then within those 8 pages, kind of broke them down based on what seemed to be the most important tasks. So gave a little bit more page allocation to the implementation and maintenance and support of the entire project, which is task 2. So, depending on what knowledge you can get from your capture team and what you know about this particular work, those allocations may be different because some tasks may be more important than I can tell from just reading the RFP. Hope that providing a little bit more details about the technical approach outline for this particular RFP makes sense. If you have any questions or comments, please provide them. We will have another video on the staffing plan section that we will be releasing shortly, and we'll do the same thing there where we sort of dive into a little bit more of the details about why we made the allocations and why we outlined those requirements the way that we did. Thank you for your time.